Vocabulary is the most important skill in any language. As my TEFL teacher said to me, when you are stuck at a railway station in the middle of nowhere in a foreign country, do you need grammar or do you need vocabulary? Today I want to share with you a technique that my students love because it helps them identify and learn the vocabulary that they need the most in my video on how to teach vocabulary in an innovative way. Ahoy from Prague, I'm Paul Colto and this badass mofo here is Yojin. Now normally native speakers teach students who are about an intermediate level and above, who have a good workable grammar and a nice amount of everyday vocabulary. But where to go from there? I see all my students as just ordinary people who want to express themselves and talk about what they love. And the technique I'm going to share with you today will help them become proficient at doing just that. I'm going to show you how to create a custom dictionary for each of your students. So the first thing to do at the beginning of the lesson is just to have your tablet or a notebook and pen open in front of you. Open a blank document on your tablet and write your student's name at the top. Obviously you can do exactly the same with a notebook, just write your student's name at the top of the page. And then through that lesson, during your conversation, every time, for example, your student doesn't know a word, so they might say, oh, what's the word for the man who makes the film? And you say, director. Yes, director. And you write down director. Or, for example, if they mispronounce a word. For example, in the Czech Republic, a lot of students say g when in English we often say j. They'll say generation instead of generation. So make a note of the word generation. If they are describing something and you think of an adjective as they're speaking that would really summarize what they're trying to say, write that down too. For example, if they're describing a film and they say, it made me really happy and just gave me a good feeling, you can think, so it's probably quite an uplifting film. Write down uplifting and quickly just explain it to them, get them to repeat it 2 or 3 times. And finally also write down if as they're talking you hear any little idiom that they might like, because students love idioms in my experience. So for example, if they are talking about a film again and they say, I understand that it's a good film, but it's not really my style. You can say, it's not really your cup of tea. And then at the end of the lesson, as like a little game, you can test your students. So for example, you will have the words in front of you and you will say, what's the name of the man whose job it is to control the directors on the set of a film? And hopefully they will say director. You can say, okay, what's the emotion you feel for if something is happy and makes you feel good? And hopefully again they will say uplifting. And finally you can say, okay, what's the expression or idiom for if you see something and you appreciate its value, but it's not really to your taste? And hopefully they will say, it's not my cup of tea. Now in between that lesson and the next lesson, print out that document that will hopefully have between 20 and 25 words or expressions. If you wrote them down on paper, you can maybe take a photograph of it and send it to your student and ask them to type it up and print it out. At the start of the next lesson, test them again in exactly the same way you did at the end of the first lesson. When that's done, hand them the printout of the vocabulary and ask them to write the word in their own language next to each word. Then ask them just to read each word for you in English so you can practice those little pronunciation problems as well. And finally, ask them to add that piece of paper to the starter pack that hopefully you gave them in the first lesson that you taught them. There's more information about starter packs in my video on how to teach a great first lesson. And then hopefully every lesson from that lesson forward you will bring a new piece of paper full of vocabulary specific to their needs to each lesson, which they can continue to add to their starter pack, and you can test them repeatedly at the beginning or at the end of each lesson on all those words so they don't forget them. Hopefully you will have been discussing things like their weekends to see what they've been up to in their normal day-to-day life, their job, so you'll be getting some good vocabulary related to their work, and also hopefully talking about their hobbies, their passions and their interests. So you will slowly be creating this custom dictionary for your student full of the vocabulary that they need and they want to use and they will use every time they speak English. Now, I developed this technique by accident in the first ever week of teaching English as a foreign language. The director of studies came up to me and told me that he wanted me to teach one student an intensive course for 4.5 hours a day for 5 days, and that student mostly wanted to focus on speaking practice. I remember that I was pretty terrified and I didn't know how I was going to do it. So I thought, okay, well, for the first lesson, I'm just going to go in and get to know this guy. So I introduced myself and then I asked him to tell me a little bit about him. And every time as the conversation flowed that he didn't know a word, I thought, wow, well, I better write that down. And at the end of that lesson, I ran next door to the office, printed that piece of paper out and came back and tested it on him at the beginning of the next session. Over the next 5 days, it turned out that he was a fascinating guy interested in politics, sport and culture, and we built up a huge list of vocabulary, and he was so satisfied that he went to the director of studies at the end of the course and told him what a great experience it had been for him. So I just continued using that technique in every lesson that I had with any student that wanted conversation practice the most. And today, 5 years later, I'm still teaching that man from that 1 week intensive course in my first ever week of ESL teaching, and he's even coming to my wedding in the summer. So thank you very much for watching. I really hope you found this video useful and that the technique will help you in your lessons. If you did find it useful, please click like. Consider sharing this video with anyone else you think might find it useful, and don't forget to subscribe. There are new videos every week on international relocation advice, ESL teaching advice, and lots more. So until next time, toot toot.